changes. The first thing we need to do, though, is approve the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The second thing that we're going to do is we're going to elect a new president, and I'm going to make that motion. I move the Board of Education elect Melissa Johnson as our new president of the Board of Education.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to hand you the gavel.
The power.
Okay, so I have a motion to elect Kelly Jones as vice president.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yay! So, I originally had notes, but I want to thank the board on behalf of the district and Dr. Lewis and the board. Thank you for allowing me to take this role, and the community for voting for us and trusting us to work with Dr. Lewis and do what's best for our students. And Jessica, thank you for paving the way and guiding me a little bit. You know, a fun fact is, you know, when your kids are driving, you tell them, pay attention to the road, so that way when they're driving, they don't, you know, they can kind of navigate, and they'll probably on their phone spacing off, and I did that a little bit, but for the most part, I paid attention, I kept my head out the window, so thank you for your guidance, and I'm excited to work with Kelly. So, I don't really have anything to report, but I'm looking forward to tomorrow, to our board retreat, where we will, we had one last year and it was very effective. We had a time to bond together as a board and to work on some of those areas that we felt needed prioritization. And we're gonna just reflect on what went well this year and some things that we need to continue to move forward with. So I'm excited about that. And this year we get to have ELT during the second half, so I think it'll be great. That's all I have. Dr. Lewis?
All right, I have a fairly lengthy report tonight, but some of those items I want to kind of address. Well, one of those items I want to address that's on the consent agenda item. But first of all, as part of the personnel report tonight, the board, you're approving a selection of Southwest Middle School Assistant Principal Sean Hansen as Assistant Director of Instructional Technology and Curriculum. He replaces Kirsten Wandra. Sean has served in his current position at Southwest for 6 years and has 22 years of experience as a middle school math coordinator, teacher, and also a coach in Blue Valley. So welcome, Sean, hopefully, if the board approves. Human Resources will host a classified hiring fair from 9 a.m. to noon on July 18th here at the ESC. We invite anyone interested in joining our team as a paraeducator or to work in food services or facilities and operations to attend. Morgan Hunter will also be there with information about substitute teaching in our district. The Jayhawk Breakfast Rotary Club recently honored Laura Rayom, a Woodlawn Elementary teacher, a second grade teacher, as its 2019 Teacher of the Year, and presented her with $1,000. So congratulations to Laura, and our thanks to our Jayhawk Rotary Club. Also want to thank the New Generation Society of Lawrence for making a $2,000 donation to our early childhood program. Next, I want to tell you a little bit about one of the board members up here. Some of the members of our community may not be aware that Jessica is a graduate of Lawrence High School. When her two children attended Cordley, she was an active participant and active with PTA and became involved with the school district as an advocate for our neighborhood schools and especially for vulnerable populations in our schools. She's been a tireless advocate for students and definitely USD 497. She served on the district's elementary school facilities task force in 2010. She was the group charged by the board with recommending a community vision and plan for the district elementary facilities. The work of that group eventually led to the 2013 bond issue to invest in improvements to all of our elementary schools. Jessica was elected to the school board in April of 2015 and was elected president on July 1st of 2018. It's the district's tradition to honor past outgoing board president by presenting her with a piece of student artwork. And so while Jessica opens her gift, I'm going to continue reading. I'll let you wrestle with that for a minute. I want to share a piece, share that this piece of art is a pastel life entitled "The Not Yet Fallen." And this fallen. You haven't fallen yet. And it was created by Katie Greer, a 2019 graduate of Lawrence High School. Invited her to come tonight, and I don't see her. But she's a 2019 graduate of Lawrence High School and the daughter of Mike and Sonia Greer. Katie made this piece. She made this piece in Wendy Verdenick's Drawing 1 class. And Katie won 3 silver key and 2 honorable mentions in the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards during her senior year. Katie is currently an apprentice artist with Van Gogh and plans to take a gap year before attending an art school. So thank you, Katie, for giving us this art that we can proudly present to our
Beautiful.
outgoing
I love
past
it.
president.
Thank you so much.
Nice.
I know.
I was like, everybody in the house.
Looks like you, too.
Very big. This is fantastic. Thank you so much.
And personally, I want to say thank you to Jessica for completing my first year together as West Board President. A lot has happened. We've been through some good times and some bad times. I'm sounding like we've been here for 10 years, right? This is only one year. But it has been a successful year for me, and that's definitely in large part to Jessica for serving as a teammate for me and welcoming me. So thank you so much, Jessica.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any words? I know this is not your final meeting.
Little, well, I do have, I do have some things I'm going to say when we do just board commentary, but ultimately, thank you very much. It's been a really great year. I've enjoyed my time as the president. I've loved serving the district in this capacity, and I do look forward to letting Melissa take over some of this leadership and being in a different kind of role. So, but this is a great group of people. I've enjoyed working with every one of you, and Dr. Lewis, you've been fantastic to work with as well. So thank you so much.
All right. All right, and lastly, on the one of the items on the consent agenda is our district and departmental organizational charts. So I want to take a moment to kind of walk through those with you. And I will tell you, it comes at a perfect timing due to the passage of our strategic plan on our last board meeting. And I dare not want it to put out a district org chart prior to the strategic plan. One, we wanted to make sure we had the right people in the right seats to get this work done. And so in the past, I think we've only just presented a district level organizational chart. But after hearing from parents, after hearing from our own staff and community members about wanting to know who to call and who reports to who, all of our departments have also established departmental organizational charts that's also attached there in the agenda. So I'm excited to walk you through this 2019-20 district leadership chart. Now, you will hear me talk about the academic side of the house and the operational side of the house. Academic side of the house being the left side of the org chart and the operational side of the house being the left side. And so a couple of changes from previous years. One is the separation of what we would call teaching, learning, and leading department, which was led by Jerry Kimball. And upon coming to the district, I had one-on-one meetings with all members of executive leadership team. I wanted to see resumes of all members of executive leadership team and their people that reported to them, because one, I didn't hire everybody, but I wanted to know where the skills lie, where the expertise lies. And so I really took some time to really not only learn members of executive leadership team and their skill sets, and I will tell you, Jerry has some tremendous skill sets, and so as a result of that, she is now the Assistant Superintendent of Technology and Innovation, and she will support innovation, she will support redesign. She will also work closely with Patrick Kelly, our Director of Career and Technical Education. She'll lead our technology efforts, including our virtual school, Power School, and what we affectionately call Wires and Pliers, the part of the technology. And so with the separation of that leading part, our elementary and secondary directors, Rick Henry and Darcy Krause, will report to our Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Stubblefield. The curriculum, which is massive and a large undertaking, and so that concerned me, along with the lack of a curriculum department upon arrival concerned me, and so you will see us really address this in theme 1 of our strategic plan. And Dr. Busselow, who's doing a fabulous job of facilitating our curriculum design, and many of our teachers have been doing a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to writing our curriculum and establishing our priority standards. And so Dr. Busselow, you see, will report to Dr. Stubblefield. Dr. Busselow will have some help in the curriculum area by working closer with Denise Johnson, Sean Hansen, if approved tonight, which will be our instructional technology specialist, Danica Moore, our equity facilitator, Shakia Bland and Rachel Smith, our curriculum learning coaches, and so they will provide some support for ELA and math. Another area of focus, and one of our teammates who had a lot on their plate, and one thing I learned about this district is that sometimes when people move, the workload just shifts to someone else, and this is one of the districts that I had an opportunity to work for, that many people were wearing many different hats, and I would have asked questions sometime around the table, why is that in your department? Why is that in your department? And one of those teammates was Kevin Harrell, who is our Executive Director of Student Services. One of the things, we moved our Native American services that will now report to Leah Wisdom, who also reports to Dr. Stubblefield, and this will ultimately address theme 2 in our strategic plan. Leah is our Director of Equity, Instruction, and Student Support, and Leah works with our CI3T, which is our multi-tiered student support system. If you recall, Kevin led that work as well, and that's large, and that's extremely huge. And I will tell you that this is an area that will prove to be high leverage for us if it's implemented with integrity. It has the potential to really address theme three, which is that social and emotional supports and for student safety, social and emotional supports, definitely the mental health, as well as our academic and behavioral needs for our scholars. And one of the things that we need to do in order to make sure we make this work is to make sure we're providing support to our teachers with this implementation, and we have that outlined in our strategic plan. But according to a recent survey that was shared with our staff, when asked this question, our school's system of tiered interventions, which is our CI3T, is successful in providing students with supports they need to be successful. 67% of our elementary teachers stated they strongly agree with that. 39% of our middle school teachers and 34% of our secondary teachers said they agree or strongly agree. So there's an opportunity for us to really get in there and really make sure we're providing the support and leverage the purpose of our CI3T. And it's really meant to catch students early on with true prevention is really what it's about. But not only that, we're also maximizing our available expertise through our teachers. As they begin to collaborate, as professionals, as they begin to collaborate about their scholars with their grade level partners or the departmental partners about what's best for our students. And so with this, we begin to leverage continue to leverage the expertise of our teachers. And so Kevin will still lead special education, mental health, and early childhood. And so the bulk of the changes so far has just been on the academic side of the house. Operational side of the house is pretty much the same, with HR leading the theme 4 work, and the addition of our executive director of research and accountability, Zach, and Kathy leading our budget and program evaluation committee, definitely leading that theme 5 work. And so you also have, like I said, you also have copies of our departmental, all departmental org charts, so you can actually see how it funnels down to individual departments. This is org chart number 1. We know we don't have the resources to really do what we want to do. I would love to have a Office of Student Support, but most importantly, I would love to make sure that Tier 1 instruction is so solid that there are very few students that will need Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports. And based on national averages, that 85% of the students should be supported with Tier 1, and only 5% being supported with Tier 3. And so I think this is a great start to the work that we want to do with our strategic plan. But I definitely wanted to make sure that we finished our strategic plan before presenting the board with a org chart. That's all I had for the report. I don't know if there were any questions on any of that or what. I didn't want to get into full details because we have some reports tonight, but I wanted to definitely make sure I addressed the rationale behind some of those.
So I have a quick question. With regard to counselors, where are they falling? Who's supervising the counselors or overseeing the?
Okay. They report to their building principal.
Building principal?
But
Okay.
they receive support through, our elementary counselors receive support through Jose.
Okay.
And our secondary counselors will receive support from Jerry, who was also a counselor.
Okay. So to the goal of creating a student support department or division, that speaks to a need for that particular, to me, like when I think about where counselors are at, where the mental health work is happening, when you look at how CI3T interacts with the work of our counselors, but also social workers on the special education side that Jose oversees, I would like to really work toward that goal of having a student support either department or a coordinator. And I don't know whether that would fall under Leah or whether you envision that following in what space, but as we move through strategic planning, that to me is this looks so much better than what I saw when I first came in. I'm really pleased with this direction, but I would like to see some thought about how we look at mental health support, social emotional supports, as it is part of that third theme that we're looking at, is creating space to really elevate that to the same level or similar level as curriculum development.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Any more questions? Concerns? This time we'll have board commentary.
Just wanted to say thank you to our design teams, Gould Evans Architects, Clark Huseman Architects, and also McCown Gordon for taking GR and I on tours of our construction projects at Liberty Memorial, West Middle School, and Lawrence High School. And I believe you also toured Free State, right? The week before the 4th of July holiday. Lots of really exciting things going on, and they've assured us that they're on schedule, and even though you walk through and there are no walls at Lawrence High, they said we're going to be having school. But no, in all seriousness, the transformations that are happening are just, it's going to just be so exciting to see those spaces with students and staff in them in the fall. Even at Lawrence High, where the construction will be continuing, I think the new spaces are going to be fantastic. So just wanted to say thank you to them. And then I also wanted to share, I and a couple of other board members had the opportunity to meet Representative Sharice Davids last week. She actually reached out to local leaders, city, county, school district. I believe she had a community event here as well, or a couple community events, but specifically had an event where it was city, county, school district leadership, and listened to people and asked questions. And I was very impressed with her focus on, she's very interested in mental health issues, healthcare issues in general. Transportation is a particular interest of hers, which is something I learned. I took advantage of the opportunity to put in a plug for the IDEA full funding bill that's been filed in the House and the Senate, and she indicated she might have a staffer follow up for some additional information. So I felt like it was a very productive opportunity to get to know her a little better.
Anyone?
Okay, I wanted to just make a couple announcements and make sure that everybody on the board is aware of them. I wanted to give you an update on the IBB process, the interest-based bargaining that we're going through for negotiations this year. We are at a point where we've been divided into 3 teams that's a mix of admin, board members, and teachers to go kind of put together an economic package to bring back to the collective team. And so that package will include everything that we've talked about that has an economic impact, and there's very many things, obviously. And so how we got to the range, because I just want this to be transparent, is we kind of visualize that we're getting that $4 million that we've talked about and that Kathy has shared with us, give or take, and that we know we have $1 million increase in benefits. And so everybody collectively agreed that that is a non-negotiable expense. And so the range that people are playing with their economic packages is 1.5 to 3 million. Again, with kind of everything that we've talked about on the board, we did make clear that we want to be spending down our deficit spending. But I would imagine that we're going to get some proposals back that are a hodgepodge of different things and different amounts of money for each one. So I think it'll be interesting to see what everybody comes up with, and interesting to have that conversation as a group, and really press us to really think through what our priorities are. And so I just want you to know that. So I would actually really encourage you, all of you, if you can, to attend that July 23rd meeting. It's a long meeting. It's from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Jill and Kelly and myself will already be there. We're always there, but I think it would be really beneficial if you could come and sit in the back with the teachers and others who attend, to hear the conversation and to hear those proposals and how that debate works. Rather than us having to come back and tell you about it, I think it'd be great if you could be there for that. So please try and get that on your calendar. And then the next thing is that we're going to have a meeting with the city about the SROs, and that is this Wednesday, July 10th, from 3 to 4 p.m. And I know Melissa and I are planning to be there, but again, my understanding is that several commissioners are coming and maybe 5 to 10 staff from the city. So I think it would be great, again, if, given that we're already doing that, it's going to be an open meeting, it's already out on the city's website. So if you can come to that as well, that would be really great. There is a white paper that Chief Burns put together that you should read. It's attached to the city's agenda, and I can ask Elise to send it tomorrow. I'll send her the link to it. So if you could read that before you come, I think that would be really beneficial. And I know Kathy has pulled together some information that maybe we can get sent around to, so everybody can see those 2 things. I just think it'd be good to have us all on the same page, having the same conversation.
Where's that meeting going to be?
That's going to be right here. Yeah, and so actually is the IBB meeting. We're all right here in the same room. So hopefully some of you can attend both of those meetings. That's it, thanks.
Can I go? Okay. I wanted to first say that I am delighted to be serving with you, and excited that Melissa has taken the position as board president, particularly as a teacher, but it's just been really, I've learned a lot from you, so I'm hoping to learn a lot more in the next year, as I will need it as we move forward. And then I wanted to recognize that there was a national convention of the National Education Association had their annual conference, or had a large conference in Houston this weekend, and there were teachers from our districts who were there who walked with teachers from all over the country in protest to the child detention camps, and I appreciate that you did that. It meant a lot to me as an American, and I was really proud that we had Lawrence teachers there. I think it's really important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you. And then I wanted to also recognize that this is the season where there are individuals running for the school board. And the cost of running for the school board is actually can be quite expensive. So as we look at trying to increase who can have a seat at this table, I think it's important as a community that we consider how we can support those people that are running and look and see, do you have an availability to help offset some of the costs that they incur in running? It can be as much as $5,000 to $6,000, and we don't get compensated to be up here. This is a free gig, which I love and am grateful to do, but that would be my ask to the community. If there is a candidate that you particularly love, to consider whether or not that's something that you can support so that we can support them once they get on the board. So that's it. Thank you.
I wanted to kind of even piggyback that the community, I think the sense of the rapport that Dr. Lewis has built, and then just the connection that community business owners are beginning to feel like they're a part of the district. We have a couple of business owners who have opened freely their doors to have meet and greets with candidates at the local level. So it just goes to show that we are a community. Anyone else?
I know this is not board commentary, but I will also be reaching out to the candidates just to make myself available to the candidates for coffee or lunch. And then in addition, I know I didn't mention this, but I hope it goes without saying, I do look forward to working with both Melissa and Kelly. We spent some time together in Philadelphia and bonded. And I will tell you, I've said this to this board before, and I may have shared it publicly, but I do have a board that really supports the work. And when I talk to colleagues or other superintendents, and they will remain nameless, but they talk to me about some, I would call, horror stories of working with their boards, and I can't engage in those conversations, but definitely looking forward to continuing the work of making sure that we're improving outcomes for all students. So definitely looking forward to it.
Thank you. Anyone else? So at this time, we will go to make a motion to approve the consent agenda. Consent agenda items are those that are considered routine and are adopted by one motion unless any board member or the superintendent requests that an item be removed. The item or items removed are voted on separately.
Second?
Oh, can I get a move? Yeah.
Oh, I thought you
No,
made
I
the
read
motion. Okay, I move we approve consent agenda.
Second.
Gordon Ross,
Yes.
Ingram,
Yes.
Kimball,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Beeson,
Yes.
Fincher.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. And at this time, we will have a report from Britt Crum-Cano? Yes. Economic Development Administrator regarding the amendment to the Neighborhood Revitalization Act, NRA.
Good evening, Lewis, as well as the school board members. Thank you for having me here. I'm the Economic Development Administrator with the City of Lawrence, and we are here to talk about some plan revisions on one of the projects that was approved in 2016. And I was told that you might want a little bit of background on what NRA, or Neighborhood Revitalization Area, is. So I wanted to see if you would like, is that something you would like? I could certainly go into that. Actually have a kind of a short little video that kind of explains it rather nicely. So I'd like to start out with that and then go over a few little highlights and then talk to you about the plan revisions. And the reason we come to you is because with NRAs, the county, the city, and the school district all consider their participation separately, so we thought it was appropriate to come to you this evening as we're making changes to the plan. So.
has a few tools in its economic belt to make sure that our city continues to thrive. One of those tools is Neighborhood Revitalization Areas, or NRAs for short. This tool is used to support projects focused on saving historic assets or revitalizing unsafe, underutilized, or blighted properties. NRAs help increase the tax base while at the same time infusing new life into areas and properties that could use some investment. Here's how it works. First, the property owner fronts all expenses to improve the property. After the project is completed, the owner receives a tax rebate based on the increased property value resulting from those improvements. The original property value is shielded from the rebate, so the groups collecting taxes still get property tax revenues, like they would have originally. Plus, NRA rebates exist for a limited time, and then only for the percentage granted. Each taxing jurisdiction weighs in on their participation level and duration, so the city, county, and school district vote separately when considering a request for an NRA. Because of the way NRAs work, projects provide a very good return on investment during the rebate period for those entities collecting taxes. Once the NRA expires, they enjoy an even higher long-term return on investment because the NRA property generates property taxes based on the entire and improved value. In 2018, there were 8 authorized NRAs in Lawrence. 6 were finished and eligible to receive rebates. Those projects included revitalization of a vacant historic building into an environmentally friendly, state-of-the-art office building, the preservation and reuse of dilapidated historic buildings into an art gallery, co-working space, and office headquarters for a homegrown business, and multifamily affordable housing and student housing. The taxes collected from all NRA projects have generated 15% more on average than what the city would have gotten if those properties were not improved. Annual returns can even be higher when a new NRA project is finished. For example, in 2018, taxing jurisdictions received $115,000 from NRA properties after providing rebates. That's compared to getting only $63,000 originally. Remember, this return is generated during the rebate period. It will be even greater after the NRA expires. NRAs put the vital in revitalization. They help increase Lawrence's quality of life, which helps with business recruitment across the city. So even though NRAs aren't focused on job creation, they make a huge impact through long-term investments in our city. NRAs don't last forever, typically 10 years, but the effects of the progress made in those areas are long-lasting and make Lawrence a great place to be.
And I want to thank the Lindsay Slater at the Chamber for doing that video for us. I am now going to kind of walk you through my PowerPoint and see if I can find it here. There we go. And I'm going to touch a little bit on the highlights of what an NRA is and how it works, and then go over the changes that we're having you consider tonight as far as the plan goes. Here we go. Okay, so the NRA, or Neighborhood Revitalization Area, is a tool that the state allows us to use in order to revitalize areas, just exactly what the name says. And it can be a single parcel and a project on that parcel, or it can be an entire neighborhood. However, in Lawrence, so far, we have not utilized it on a neighborhood basis. It's been on a project-by-project basis. And it can be used primarily to spur investment in disinvested areas. I think this is one of our more successful economic development tools for a variety of reasons, but it helps us correct a lot of things and actually bring maybe a problem property or parcel back into productive use. Again, each of the taxing jurisdictions considers their participation separately, and for how long and for what percentage of duration. I will tell you, in the past, most often all the taxing jurisdictions have voted as the city has voted. 826 was one where there was a little bit of departure, and the rebate given to 826 changed in terms of the percentage that the city granted. The city granted 50%, the county granted 85% over a 10-year period, and the school district went with the city's version. And so this is kind of how it works. Whatever the property is bringing in terms of tax revenues for all the taxing jurisdictions, that is shielded from the rebate. It's only the incremental increase in value due to improvements that is subject to the rebate. And then it's only for the percentage granted and only for the duration granted. So what this, the effect basically is that you're at least going to get the same amount of money you would have gotten if the property didn't improve. More than likely, the taxing jurisdictions are going to get even more because unless 100% rebate is given, you're going to get that percentage that wasn't granted on the increment as well. And then, of course, once the NRA expires, you get the taxing revenues on the total increased value, which is usually very substantial. Because in the case of 826, it was a blighted, abandoned historic building out in the East Lawrence Warehouse Arts District. And so it wasn't generating very much to begin with. So this is actually a chart that I like to do to kind of give you an idea. The base value is the blue. Again, whatever the property had been generating, you're still going to get that. And then the rebate period, you see the amount that is rebated after 10 years, and the increase that the taxing jurisdictions get, even during the rebate period, is the orange. And then after the NRA expires, then you have a substantial increase in taxing revenues. So it really is a good short-term return on investment and a very good long-term return on investment. We have many NRAs. This is a very popular tool that we've used a lot, and I won't go into all of them. The 826, again, this was an abandoned, it was the Seedco building, and there was all sorts of safety issues. Most of the buildings out in that area, if you've not had a chance to see them, there were holes in the ceilings, there were holes in the floors, they were not safe. And the NRA has been used on many projects out there to revitalize as well as build. And so that's really kind of brought that whole area back to life. When the 826 Pennsylvania NRA was approved, the city knew that our economic development policy was going to change. We also knew that we wanted to include an affordable housing provision. But the policy wasn't done at the time. And so the 826 project somewhat was our guinea pig. We knew that we didn't know a whole lot about affordable housing, and we certainly didn't know how to administer and do compliance on it. So we knew we were going to have to come back at some point and clear all that up. But the governing bodies decided that they wanted, the city commissioners decided that they wanted to go ahead and request that this project have 2 affordable housing units in it. So they have put aside 2 affordable housing units, 1 bedroom. And so basically what we are doing tonight is we're basically just doing an administrative clarification on tenant eligibility and how they report all that and how they confirm that as well. So all of our changes really, in my mind, are just administrative in terms of trying to shore up that economic development affordable housing provision to make sure that we all kind of know what we're doing a little bit better. So, so basically the changes, again, I don't think there's anything earth-shattering here that you guys would be interested in, but mainly administrative. We have went through the entire process with this plan amendment, and so it's went to the City Commission. It's been referred to our Public Incentives Review Committee. It's been referred to our Affordable Housing Advisory Board. And those 2 committees came back and both voted in approval of the changes. And then the City Commission considered the ordinance that would make these changes on first reading on the 2nd of July, and they unanimously approved it as well. It'll go back to them after the school district and the county considered it for their final reading. But so basically what we're here tonight for is, again, just to let you know about the recommendations and to make sure that you guys would be okay with the changes that we want to make to the plan. So,
We make a motion.
and I will be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
So just as a general observation, and this might be in part on my responsibility, I tried to get kind of an understanding of what it is you were asking from us. as we moved forward. So I'm certainly glad to hear that it's gone through the city's identified committees. But things like clarifications on tenants' eligibility and certification requirements, I would actually like to know what the details of that. Some of these things which have been kind of brushed off as something that we would just kind of rubber stamp, I actually am not inclined to do that personally. Not that I don't support the city's efforts, but I do think including us on some of those conversations would be helpful in terms of, given that we are required to take action.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about the decision-making there as the city is right now kind of doing lots of things that don't include everybody in the community that they might?
This particular project, the two affordable housing units had to meet certain thresholds as defined by a certain affordable housing agency. In this case, it was the Kansas Housing Authority, and they were targeted for 60% of median family income. Not to confuse you, but our policy went with a different threshold, but this particular one went with that threshold. Again, it was kind of before the policy was in place, and we didn't, the commissioners had not quite decided, and the Affordable Housing Board had not actually defined affordable housing. So that was the threshold. There was no guidance on how you would verify a tenant's income in terms of if they qualified. It was suggested that they work with a housing authority, a local housing authority, to verify that. But there was really no guidance. So this brings in all the guidance. It makes them go to the Lawrence-Douglas County Housing Authority. They've got all the software necessary to qualify these potential tenants. They have a means of hanging on to that proprietary data, so the landlord nor the city has to be responsible for having those, pay stubs or social security numbers or any of that documentation that could, in our case, be subject to open records. We don't like to hang on to proprietary data. So Lawrence-Douglas County Housing Authority is a third-party agency. They will certify that those tenants are eligible, income eligible, to actually occupy an affordable housing unit. And then they will send both the city and the landlord a certificate stating that. So that's all the city has to know, is that, yes, they are eligible and they were occupying that unit in 2018 or 2019 or whatever.
So in your understanding of why there needs to be required action from the school board, what input was envisioned when it was decided that the city, county, and school board should provide input related to actions requested?
I think it's a matter of process. We just wanted to make sure that we included all the voting entities in this, even though it's really administrative clarification for everybody. We just wanted to make sure, since if it was a new NRA, I'd be coming to you guys and having you vote on if you wanted to participate. Okay. You already voted that you did want to participate. Mm-hmm. Now we're just coming back to make sure that you guys are okay. We're just asking for your approval, basically.
Kelly, I maybe could shed a little bit more light on that as well. So I'm the board's representative on the Public Incentive Review Committee. Currently, Jill was the person who served in that capacity before me, and I think maybe you were on the PERC when they approved this project initially before I rejoined.
Back and forth.
Yeah. At the last PERC meeting, which was just a few weeks ago, we talked about this in combination with the PERC providing a recommendation to the City Commission on the changes to the policy itself that require all of these things. Mm-hmm. And so that was a point of discussion that, questions asked about, okay, how do you determine eligibility? Who's going to determine eligibility, and who gets that data from tenants? What happens if someone becomes ineligible in the middle of their year of leasing a unit, and what happens? So there were a lot of questions asked around all of that. So my understanding of this is that the city has set a policy for affordable housing as part of NRA requests.
Okay.
They asked the PERC to weigh in on that policy, and at the same time, they brought this forward as, okay, if the city commission is approving this policy, these are the changes that have to be made to this particular NRA to bring it into compliance with the new policy, because it was kind of straddling the line in terms of when they adopted the affordable housing policy, but realized that there were some issues with its application, particularly on a project like this where there aren't very many units. Like the math, for example, they were coming up with like you have to have a quarter of a unit dedicated for affordable housing. And so they had to do some tweaks to their policy to make it make sense in that way. So then, to kind of back up to the larger question you asked about state law says that because we are a taxing jurisdiction, we have to participate in signing off on all of these. I think the thing that's always a frustration for me is that in reality, this has little to no impact on our school funding, right? So the only funds that it has any impact on at all would be those funds that are levied funds, like our capital outlay, where we set the mill levy at 8, and we get what we get. The rest of our local option budget, the mill levy is set to generate a particular amount of money, so it doesn't really matter.
Right.
Like the mill levy fluctuates up and down because we get X dollars, not because properties are generating more or less tax dollars for us, if that makes sense. So in actuality, these requests have almost no impact on our funding. And it affects us much differently than it would the city or the county.
Okay, that's a really helpful clarification, and it's something that I really couldn't on my own come to fully understand. So I appreciate your insight and that you've come and just tried to explain this to us at a deeper level. Thank you.
Any more questions? Do we have motion? There is one.
I'll make the motion. I move the Board of Education approves the revisions to the 826 Pennsylvania Street NRA plan.
Second, any second?
Second.
Fincher,
Yes.
Gordon Ross,
Yes.
Ingram,
Yes.
Kimball,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Beeson.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. We'll have Executive Director of Finance, Kathy Johnson, up to provide us with more information regarding legislative updates in preparation for the 1920 budget.
Good evening, Kathy Johnson, Executive Director of Finance. I'm going to give you just a brief update from legislative information, which some of it you've already seen. A few little things from workshop, and actually some good news at the end. Oh, a little bit of good news. As we just continue to learn. So just briefly a reminder of what our timeline is. Our timeline, the 24th, we kind of did a preliminary update. I've been to the budget workshop. Our actual forms will come to us on Wednesday, so I still don't have kind of all the official, what our state aid percentages, some different things, but should have those in the middle of the week and be able to start fine tuning some things for us. We're continuing to do year end. We hope to have most of that done and cleared out the end of this week, so then we can start pulling information. Every time I pull something, the numbers move on me because they're still posting stuff, so we're getting there. The 22nd is when you'll approve the budget for publication. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the very end, and then you'll have your budget hearing and your budget approval. So just the first is just that reminder of those where we were, and the far right column is where our base state aid turned out to be. We talked about this last week and the dollars tied to that, but that was kind of I just reiterated that. After 22-23, it will be based on a % CPI increase, and so there will be something built in. We'll just, as we get closer, they'll determine what that rate increase is based on CPI.
Kathy, can I interrupt you for a second? I'm sorry. We're just looking at dates here and wanting to make sure that we are not putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. Our next IBB meeting where the 3 teams are going to come with their economic proposals is July 23rd. I feel like we should not have that before. We shouldn't have it where we recommend a budget for publication before we have that meeting.
Choice based on timing, and all you're doing is high level. You're not approving those details. There's still flexibility for those.
So-
Okay.
All you're doing is the maximum formula and the mill levy set. What you
Okay.
do within that is still available for you to make those decisions.
Okay, that I
Based on
understand.
timeline, we don't have a choice if we're going to meet our statutory 10 days. 10
Okay,
days.
that's fine. I appreciate that clarification and that that's on the record.
And to keep that within your board meeting schedule.
And then the other question I had, and maybe you're going to get to it, is about our mill levy and whether or not an increase will have any impact on what general fund money.
Yeah,
Okay,
that a little bit later.
all right, great. Thank you.
Yep. So just a reminder, our at-risk funds is one that's a post-legislative audit. There was some specific language in the bill that's going to require the State Board of Education to identify and approve evidence-based programs provided by the state based on national nonprofit organizations. And it kind of defines that. They don't really have that defined, so to speak, because they are reviewing through the post-legislative audit what districts are currently doing with at-risk funds, if they are evidence-based expenditures, if they're not, how that needs to look going forward, because that's a large chunk of dollars that they're setting aside for districts through the weightings. They did indicate that for us to get kind of a preview of what has already been demonstrated as evidence-based programs, to refer to special education and Title I federal grant evidence-based programs. And so this link here kind of will take you to their webpage and some of that information about what those programs are using as evidence-based programs, and kind of gives us a light of maybe the direction they'll go as they start looking at risk program funding and how that they want that to look going forward. May change how we're doing things, it may not, and we won't really know that until they get through some of these audits. They're kind of never really delved into it to that level, so I think it's a little bit of a slow start on those post-legislative audits and for this particular area, and so it's sort of evolving. So we'll circle back around as we learn more about this. Currently, how we're using it fits within the guidelines that we've been given to date. So that won't change until we determine what needs to change with that. Just a reminder then that these are the post-legislative audits that they do have on the docket. They're going to look at at-risk funding, currently are doing that. Next year, they will look at cash, unencumbered cash balances and bilingual. Then they'll look at virtual, and then they'll look at what they're calling a cost function performance audit. Have a feeling that's tied to those functions that we spend our money in, how those are costing out by districts, probably determining if they're impacting student achievement based on some of that. And now that they're collecting by building information under kind of the same thing, and some of the new accountability reports, I think all of that will probably dovetail into that 2024 post-legislative audit, and probably more about what that looks like as they get closer. So that's kind of on the docket of the plan to date. There is quite a bit of emphasis on these accountability reports that was in the bill. It's requiring the State Department of Ed to create what they're calling a one-page performance accountability on each school district and each school building within the district. And it's going to include information required by ESSA, or the Federal Every Student Succeeds Act. And it's going to be tied to that. It does appear there's a lot of test results that get involved in this, because that seems to be kind of where the legislature is sitting on some of those kinds of things. So that will evolve a little bit. Dennis did indicate at the state that might be 2 pages. They're not sure they can cram it all in on 1 page based on everything that's expected to be on this like summary page. So that they will have out to us to see as they develop it. The other thing they're required to prepare and create is what they're calling an annual longitudinal report on student achievements on state assessments for English, language arts, math, and science. So that will be, again, all of our results, all of our test results and things that get submitted. These are some reports the state's being required to summarize in a nice, pretty little report that will then have to be published on our websites and our school websites, as well as the state's. So the school district also, there's a part of that funding report, they want to make sure that we are representing or sharing our virtual school enrollment information as well as our brick and mortar or our school district. I think sometimes the virtual kind of gets left out of enrollment counts, and they want districts to make sure that that's seen. We'll see what that means, but it's something that they shared. The other thing that they want publicly shared is if school districts are spending money on legal services that challenge the constitutionality of the school finance system, they want to know what you're spending out of your school money for that purpose, or what you're paying for another organization to do that on your behalf. And that's all a result of the court case and that transparency of where districts are spending their money on that instead of in the classroom, I guess, is kind of where they're going with that. So these report publications then, it's going to require them to be on every school district's website as well as the state. So the state already has some of this information. If you go to their data central or you look at report card information on schools and school districts, you're already going to see this information. But what this is requiring them to do is to put it all in a nice little package that's very pretty and then very direct on a link instead of anybody having to create it. If I want to look at Lawrence USD 497, I can click here and I'm going to get it, or I'm going to click on this school and I'm going to get it. And I'm going to be able to see the school district state budget documents, which is already out there. And then this one-page performance accountability report that they're required to create, and then this longitudinal report on student achievement. So there's going to have to be something on the state website for every district that has those three things. The district then is going to be required to put our state budget document out there, which we already do, and then sort of the school district funding report, which is something we're not quite sure what it's going to look like, but that's being created through the state. Those will have to be on our website, and they will also have to be on any school homepage websites, so if they have individuals, so district and school. And then we also have to have very prominently the link that's going to take them to those state reports. So they're trying to make it very like visual and very, so nobody has to really work very hard to get the information, I think is the bottom line with that. And more in a one page, they all look alike. They're all calculated the same based on the reports that the state is going to populate those with. So that's new. We're relying on the state to provide us with some of the guidance on what those look like, but we'll start seeing those. And we may get questions with those because they're easier to get to versus having to go to a school report card. We may get public more interested in what they say as a result of that, and probably definitely more questions from the legislature as it's easier for them to compare. So that'll be something that we'll share as we learn and give you some previews of those. Then the other thing is that they've extended the ACT to be 11th grade and 12th grade with no charge to students. So that will be something that will continue. And then they did the extension of the 20 mills in general fund and the 20,000 exemption, homestead exemption. So those will continue. The next one then, there is a change, we've talked about this a little bit, is they are changing the safe to school drills. There were so many last year that was a little challenging. So they're being a little more scriptive on what those look like. They're gonna make at least 4 fire drills, 2 tornado drills, 1 in September and 1 in March, and then only 3 what they call crisis drills for each school year. They do require those to be within school hours and some of those kinds of things. We do have the ability in the bill that the state fire marshal can grant a variance for a number or the manner of the drill for students receiving special education or related services. So I know there's sometimes been a concern about some of our students, maybe the alarms kind of create a problem or some different things. And so there appears to be a way to get some exemption or some variance to that on some students that might not be a good idea to have that many drills with them or something. So that's good to know that there is that ability within the bill to do that. Any questions on that? That does limit it. I think it was almost like 19 or something last year. Makes it a little more reasonable, 16 something, yeah. So this does make that a little bit more reasonable. And they're still working on what does that mean as far as what crisis drills look like, but they do want those to be. They did change, and we're going to do some research on what this can actually mean to us, but they did change the definition of the school bus for this motor fuel tax purposes. So it's been just school buses. They're kind of extending that definition to vans, theoretically, is basically where it's going. But they have to transport students. So if we're using vans to transport staff to PD, the gas in the van that we bought, that doesn't count, but gas for students would. So there could be some dual accounting of that would need to be, and I'm not really sure what the credit will or won't be for us. So we'll do some checking on that and see how complicated that's going to end up being. But we may be able to get some credit back on some of the fuel that we're purchasing on vans now versus what they were just defining as a school bus. So those are some basic legislative pieces that I wanted to just kind of remind you are out there. I believe we shared the legislative summary of the whole kit and caboodle. If you want to look at that the state provided us at workshop, and it has pretty much everything that was an educational bill. Some of them I didn't, you can read about it. I think you probably wanted me to read them to you. One thing that was kind of buried in the bill and kind of lost any information about and really hasn't been shared up until budget workshop, and it was like, oh, by the way, this year we're going to actually get a CPI index on our LOB base state aid per pupil amount, which is sort of a false base amount. And so we didn't know what that amount was, so everything's been planned on what the known amount is. So we learned at budget workshop what the new amount will be. And so just as a refresher, our local option budget is 33% of your general fund, but it's 33% of the Form 150 with some adjustments. So it's not straight 33% of that legal max on Form 150. It has some changes to it. We are at our maximum. 33% is all we can do. We have it. We did it as soon as we were able to do it, and it is a function of just the formula. The calculation for it and what we've been working with is it's the weighted FTE on Form 150 less the special education weighting times this new or different amount, because if you remember, the amount for general fund is a different number. It's the 4436. And you get a calculated amount. And then you add in special education, either 0809 or current, whichever is higher, and you get this new base for general fund that the 33% is calculated on. The rate is going to be increased based on a 3-year average of the CPI, which is basically about 1.5%. So it's going to bump to 45.58 next year for us instead of 44.90. That will generate some new dollars for us. It generates about $300,000 more dollars if we run it through the formula based on what we know. So that's good news. It does appear that it won't require a mill levy increase. So the thing to remember about our mill levy is that we can't just raise a mill levy and generate more dollars. Our mill levy is a function of what we need to raise local revenues. So we have this formula. It says, here's what you get. Fill that bucket with state aid, and what's left is tax money that's required. Well, how many mills does it take to fill the tax levy side? That's your mill levy. It's not going to be anything different because that's all you can spend is that formula. There's nothing you can change but that formula. So the formula tells us what our cap is. The mill levy is a result of that formula. Cap, state aid, local property taxes divided by your assessed valuation, that's your mill levy, that's what you get. Can't do anything different with the mill levy. I could tax you more, but I can't spend it. So I'm not going to do that. We're only going to tax you for what's required to fill the bucket after state aid fills the bucket. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, so that's the only other place we can raise additional dollars is our local. We're doing it within our legal max. And with this extra, we're going to gain another $300,000 that we weren't planning for because of the CPI. So that's the good news, right? The other good news is it does look like we're going to be able to do it without actually having to increase the mill levy based on where our valuation is. We'll know more as we get closer to being able to bring it back to you on the 22nd. But my really rough and quick, I don't have quite all my county information, would indicate that we should be able to do that without having to do a mill levy increase, which would be even better. So you can still realize all that you want without having to.
Okay, I'm going to make you repeat yourself. I'm going to make you repeat yourself. Mostly because I think it's important. I need to hear it again, but also I think everybody that's a part of this IBB process needs to hear it again. So what I am hearing and understanding is that our LOB is already at the highest that it can be. We can't raise it. And the mill levy is really a reactionary thing for us in the school district, in that that raises or falls based upon what our LOB says it has to be. Okay, so increasing the mill levy is not going to do anything for us. In fact, it's only going to happen sort of, again, it's going to kind of happen to us rather than us making that decision. Okay, I just wanted to say that out loud so that I understood it correctly and that it's out there, because it's definitely a question that's come up several times.
And then can you also expand on what we can utilize that money for, the extra money?
Basically like what your general fund is. It's considered the supplemental general fund. So it's the local taxpayers are providing additional dollars of general operating dollars that goes beyond the Form 150 legal max. 33% basically is what it is based on this adjusted. And we have used for ongoing costs since we've been allowed to be able to do this. So these are dollars that are already committed, they already are being spent, they're already part of how we do our general operating expenditures.
So this $312,000 will go into general fund.
It goes into, well, state requires us to keep them separate.
Okay.
LOB and general are, this together are our operating dollars, but fund-wise we have to do. So I'm going to go to the next slide.
Okay.
So the next slide will demonstrate what we've been sharing with you, in that 1819 is our legal max amount. When I give this new dollars, this raises this from the right at 4 million to the 4,000,003. I'm not going to kind of reiterate, everything else is the same slide that we saw before.
Okay.
And then when I go to the last page, if you remember, this was kind of our working document. Again, this is estimate subject to change. As we get closer to the 22nd, we'll know more about our deficit and what that actually looks like. We'll revisit this as to where we ended up, what we had to do to zero the budget at the end of this year and stay legal, and because we do have to do that. And the only thing that's really missing that hasn't been a budget neutral decision up to this point is what we're going to do in compensation packages over and above fringe benefits. And what that tells us is that based on that new funding estimate, with the LOB being able to generate a little bit more money for us, is that we have about $1.7 million that we've not committed at this point. And you could publish the budget and still not have committed that $1.7 million. Because all we're doing is the legal max amounts. So when we look at Code 99, you're approving this big number and the mill levy tied to it. But how we spend those details, you decide every board meeting when we have board approvals that are consent items, when you set salaries, when you have a fringe, when you have an emergency and something happens. Those individual line items within that hopefully are pretty consistent with what our plans are and how we're going forward. But they could change mid-year as a result of some unknown, those kinds of things. So those will be things that will continue to evolve as you have future board meetings and future decisions as a result of those approvals.
And so again, I want to say something just to say it. I also just want to make sure that when we, on the 22nd, approve a budget, we are not committing to how much deficit spending we're going to do, how much salary we're going to do, any of those things.
Technically, no, but I will tell you that if that deficit is not dealt with, you will be illegal as far as having a budget that is not balanced. And by state law in Kansas, we cannot have an unbalanced budget. So if I can't find enough funds and reserves to bring us back to zero and we end up with something in the red, you have an illegal budget that you would be approving. So we do have to address deficit enough to stay legal.
So we had a deficit last year, correct?
We did, but we had reserves.
Okay.
And we will spend our reserves this year because we didn't deal with 100% of our deficit a year ago. And if we don't deal with it more or less fully, you won't have reserves to deal with it at the end of 2021.
So part of the conversation in negotiations, just to kind of go back to that because it's related, when we said, I don't think the number was 1.7, but it was something around there, 1.5 from our last meeting. It was 1.4 because now we have this extra 300,000, correct?
You're right, $1 million.
Okay, so the deficit, when you calculate the deficit and the 1.7 that we have here, that is around $3 million, correct?
You add those two.
Yeah, and the other million is fringe. So in our process of negotiations, we've been talking about this range of 3 million, well, actually 1.4 1.4 million-ish or 1.7 million-ish to 3 million. But what you are advising the district right now is that the amount of money that we should be looking at legally is 1,000,007. We should not be looking at a range of 3.
And my
Up to
concern
3.
is that it might be less than that if our deficit is higher than 1.5 million. If we cannot make it balance and know that we can get through next year maintaining something that doesn't put you in the red, that you cannot cover next year, you're at that cliff. The reserves and contingency will be down. You're at that cliff. You'll have a much better picture on the 22nd because you haven't decided anything. That'll fall into that bucket, but it's going to be critical that you look at that very closely because you're making a decision that impacts where we may not be able to close out our budget a year from now, or that's not in the red.
What are the consequences of continuing deficit spending?
We won't have money to pay payroll. We have to get it's just like at home. You take out a mortgage and you can't pay it every month but you can because you have savings. You didn't change your resources. At some point, your savings runs out, but you still have to pay that mortgage. And if your resources don't increase or you don't cut something to make yourself back even after your savings is gone, you better sell your house because you don't have the dollars to continue to pay off your mortgage. We have to look at it in the same fashion as that because we cannot legally not have a balanced budget.
So my next question, this is my final one, is related to being on the negotiations team. If we wanted to provide teachers and educators and other staff in the district with a compensation package that exceeded $1,740,000, what are the types of choices we would have to make as a board to make that happen and still do deficit spending, and still address the deficit spending?
We'll have to cut anything that we can cut at this point to make whatever that is balance. So you can't, it would be things that are at-will agreements. They would be PD activities. You would have to cut site budgets to where they don't have supplies. You might have to cancel events. You might have to cut classified or hourly, like I said, at-will agreements because, or not hire. You know, you would have less substitutes. Anything that you can do to grab the dollars that's required is what we would have to do. You would feel that pinch because that's the only thing we can do. You have to pay the utility bills. You have to pay the buses. You have to pay those core contracts. So the only thing you can do is what's discretionary. And discretionary supplies and materials and professional development and travel. So that's where you would have to go.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any more questions?
And we appreciate you. We're asking these questions because they're asked of us.
Sure. I'm hoping when all's said and done, you know, that we're not anywhere different than what our projections are showing up here. But we are at that point where we have to deal with it because we're not going to get huge amounts of new resources going forward. And if we want to make a difference and direct those, we're hoping through the next year as we have our budget program and evaluation committees review different places we're spending money, that we can find efficiencies there, which would then help. You have to cut something to add. It's kind of that scenario I said, if your closet's full and you want 3 new pairs of shoes, you need to take out 3 pairs of shoes so you can put the 3 in.
Is that how you're supposed to do it?
So, you know, it's that kind of thing. We have a cap. We can't change that cap. So we have to live within that. We got to figure out how that needs to look differently.
So I think one of the challenges,
That's okay. I was just going to say, we'll send this clip to the whole committee to be able to make sure that they've watched it before those conversations start.
Yes.
and if they have
They have any
additional questions,
questions,
they can bring
Reach out to
those.
you. Okay.
And then I just want to add to, I'm mindful that last board meeting, you showed us that moving forward after this year, the amount of dollars available to us is something like $800,000 approximately a year.
Approximately $1.8 million. I think
$1.8 million
figure came from if health insurance continues to eat up
Okay.
$1 million every
So $1.8
year.
million.
Now, what wasn't represented there is if the CPI will continue on the LOB, we might get another couple hundred thousand there, and it doesn't reflect if we grow. So if we do have a bump in enrollment, it's a year behind,
Yeah.
but potentially that would impact what those dollars will be available to
Okay.
us.
I still think that as a district, it's a reasonable goal for us to think about what para compensation is, what our educators' compensation is. So as we look forward into the next year, your point about finding efficiencies, how we look at, where we might be duplicating efforts or where there are spaces where we can create some savings so that we're not in this space next year negotiating with even less than we have this year, and that we really have a targeted goal or targeted plan for the next coming years so that there is light for the teachers or expectations the teachers can have that we continue to work to provide them with as much compensation as we possibly can.
Yeah.
Are those goals or tasks are those laid out in the budget committee at this point? Or like, is that
Kathy can probably address that better.
I don't know that where we want to be in salary.
program evaluation, I
Budget
guess?
committee is setting. I think that's something that is part of your vision of where do we want that to look like, and then how do we get there? And if that's where we want to be, and it takes us 3 years to get there, then if we get new money, here's what that looks like off the top. But then you've got to deal with class size, you've got to deal with all those other kinds of things that are going to come to you through the strategic plan, where they may want more money for X, Y, and Z. So all of that is those little puzzle pieces that have to go together, but we're still stuck within a cap of a formula. And so that's our challenge if we choose to accept it. Is that the Mission Impossible theme? So it's just something that we're going to have to work together to do, because it will be challenging to get there. And we're working a little upside down, which is unfortunate.
And I think in the next year, we likely will not be working with that, hopefully.
Hopefully not, and hopefully, we can bridge that enough that we don't feel like we're so upside down to where it's not so scary to close the year end and pray and cross our fingers. Okay, so the next steps really are on the 22nd. We'll give you a scope of where we ended the year, what we had to do to get it in sync, and then what those legal max amounts are in the Code 99 that you approve. Again, you're just approving budget authority. You're not approving spending. You're just approving that budget authority. Those will change as we get, they're dependent on state audit. They're dependent upon whether we actually realize the revenue that was published as just to get the authority. Doesn't mean that's what you have spending ability. So those are two different things. And we've talked about that and why you publish high and some of those things. And then you're setting the mill levy maximums. So what we set as mill levies, if you've had a hearing, you want to go down, that's one thing, but you can't go above it. So what we set is those two things. And then on the 12th, you'll have the hearing at the beginning of our board meeting, and then during the board meeting, you'll approve the budget, as far as just that form and what the state. If there's no more questions, that would be it.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Our final report is from the new Executive Director of Research, Evaluation, and Accountability, Zachary Conrad, with an end-of-the-year data report.
Good evening, board members. Some of you I've met. It was under unfortunate circumstances in the tornado shelter stairwell, which some board members refuse to go into, but
Safe, sir. We all safe. No board members were harmed.
Kansas.
so I want to present a few items of data. They're listed here. First, some assessment data from MAP, NWA MAP, some student survey data, some discipline data, and attendance data. We want to start with NWA MAP data. Some of the key things that we found in looking at NWA MAP data is that although it provides some information, it's limited in the information that we can glean from it in regards to how well we're doing on criterion referenced assessment, such as CAP. And so some of the data, none of this data should be a surprise to anybody. The first thing we looked at is breaking it down by grade level, just district-wide, wanting to know how each grade level was doing district-wide compared to the national RIT score. So this is the spring semester RIT score compared to the national RIT score average. We could see that each grade level is about average across the district. And again, middle school tells us a very similar story where we're about average. And that's pretty much where we should be. 68% of the population is going to fall within this average normal distribution. So nothing surprising there. So a few of the takeaways is at the elementary level, 10 of our buildings had an average RIT score or above the national average, where 4 of our buildings were below the national average. And then at the middle school, it was split 50-50. So 2 were above, 2 were below. Again, we were right there, so there wasn't a significant difference. We were all floating around the average. We also broke it down by race, and this is based on the average score of this race across all grade levels, and then across all grade levels, that national average. And there was 2 subgroups that were significantly different than the norm, or than that average, and it was students that identified as Asian and students that identified as American Indian or Alaskan Native. We did the same thing for math, and we didn't find really anything different here. We're about average across the board. 1 less building was at or above the RIT score for math. 5 buildings had the average RIT score or below for elementary, and the middle school, again, was split 50-50. The difference here was subgroup Asian and subgroups Black, African American, and American Indian and Alaskan Native that were significantly different from the mean. We also wanted to look at growth, and this growth was taken spring to spring, so spring of 2018, spring of 2019, students who made growth. So there's 3 columns here. The first column is no. Those are students that did not make growth. Their projected growth. And then the third column is yes. Those are students that did make projected growth. We broke this down by lunch status and by subgroup, by race. We found that regardless of race, if you are in the free lunch group category, there is no difference, no statistical difference between any of the races within that group. So if you identify, if you had the category free lunch, regardless of race, you were not likely to meet your growth, projected growth score. Conversely, paid lunch, regardless of race, except for Asian, you are also just as likely to not meet your growth score. And so we found that the pseudo measure of poverty, or SES, that we use free and reduced lunch for, was a bigger predictor, or a more significant predictor of how well you would do if you would meet growth or not, than race itself. So just to recap a few of the points that we saw with NWA MAP is it's limited in the information it can provide us, provide the school district compared to CAP. We're about average, enough said, but when we look at the CAP scores, that criterion reference tells us that we need to be doing more. So we're not meeting that threshold. So when we think about the norm referenced assessment, it's comparing us to how other students are doing across this country, and MAP is terrific for that. But our CAP scores in the state are telling us that's not sufficient. We need to go above and beyond that. And MAP falls somewhat short in giving us the information that we need to make those decisions to improve. We also found that students that start behind often stay behind, that throughout elementary school it carries over into middle school, those feeder schools. And then the gaps in the RIT scores and meeting the growth targets, particularly between SES and race, continue to exist. Are there any questions on the assessment data?
I have a data question. So we looked at the like the elementary takeaway slide and the middle school takeaway slide. When you look at comparison of the 9 buildings and the 5 buildings, are those 5 buildings, do they represent are they more likely to be, presumably they're more likely to be our buildings that are serving high percentages of low income students?
Yes.
Correct. And is that, I'm presuming, the case in middle school as well?
Yes.
Okay, and so that information will help us target resources, correct? In addition to the title money that those buildings, some of those buildings get,
Right.
correct?
That's correct. We've actually looked at the buildings, even really down to the teacher classroom level.
Okay, great, thank you. And then, oh wait, I can wait till the end for this next question.
Okay. The next set of data that we looked at was behavior and discipline data. Now this year we were rolling out, or this past year rolling out Power School, and entering the data in there was somewhat tricky and was not entirely defined in the teacher's mind or the administrator's mind of how to do it properly. And so this data is somewhat limited in how it got reported, and so how we can interpret these results, I would just put some caution on. But it is baseline data, and as we improve our systematic way of entering the data, we should begin to see the trends even out, and it'd be more informative data in the future, is what we're hoping. So with that caution, we can still look at some of this data. So these are the top 5 infractions that were reported in Power School, subtypes. And we have interventions or minors, and we have office referrals or majors. So classroom behavior, skipping class, refusing directions. These are our top 5. We broke it down by level, so elementary, middle school, and high school, and then the district overall. Those were the number of students enrolled, and then the number of interventions, and then the number of office referrals. So that middle column, n divided by 100 students, we wanted to put them on a similar scale so that we can interpret those results a little easier. And then the percent of all referrals. So that's a combination of your intervention and your office referrals, and then what percent it was.
So
And we kind of did that so that we can break down how the schools look against each other.
So when you broke down the middle school numbers, those seem a little out of whack with the elementary and high school. Maybe I'm reading it wrong.
You are not.
Okay, so,
And I think this chart kind of
okay.
displays it a little better.
And so then I would assume that means we probably had middle schools that were higher than others as well, out of the 4.
Yes, yes, we did. And we have that data broken down that way by school so that we can target that.
Are you guys going to get to what interventions you're thinking about putting in place in those schools in this presentation? Okay.
Yes, at the end.
Now,
Okay.
I guess that's the way the question.
So yes, we really want to get through this data aspect of it fast, because at the end of the day, it's what are we going to do with it? That's going to be the meat of the conversation. And so
I'll stop asking questions.
that didn't come from me. So we broke it down by race. And again, here's the table, and here's the chart. We also included students with disabilities. Before I move on to surveys, is there any additional questions here? Seeing there are none. We gave a survey to students, and this lists the questions on the left-hand side, or the items on the left-hand side. My teachers give me individual attention when I need it. Teachers are available when I need to talk to them. My teachers care about me. We then grouped it into two categories: you agree or disagree. And then we clustered the schools together by level, so high schools and middle schools. The blue number underneath it is the percentage. So if we read this down, of my teachers give me individual attention when I need it. In the high school, 76% of high schoolers who answered this survey strongly agree or somewhat agree to that question. 23% somewhat disagree or strongly disagree to that question. And in the middle school, you see the same. The number on top is the actual number of students who responded to the survey. So 1,159 middle school students responded to the survey. 75%, that number agreed with the statement or strongly agreed. We had 9 questions that we pulled out that we wanted to display. This is breaking it down by race, somewhat difficult to see, to fit it on the chart. So again, we see that the numbers are about even across the board and representative of numbers that we saw breaking it down by high school and middle school. About 75% across the board agreed with that statement. Here's 3 additional questions. If I'm absent, there's a teacher or some other adult at this school that will notice my absence, and then so on. Most of them were hovering around 80%, strongly agree or somewhat agree, and broken down by race. Again, we hover around 80% across the board. The 3 last questions that we put on here about safety, and one at the bottom, the things I'm learning in the school are important to me. The high school is somewhat different than the middle school. Are there any questions about the survey data? Fantastic, we'll move on. Ooh.
I guess I have one quick question. I don't know, it just seems like the prefer not to answer is kind of high percentage-wise, but maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. So is that normal to have kind of 30% not answer a question?
When it comes to race, it's going to be, I don't know that there's like a normal.
Okay.
What they do. It might be worth looking into of why such a high percentage of students felt like not answering that question. Mm-hmm. That could be explored. But as far as like normal.
Okay.
Right. We also had attendance data. So this was data that was pulled from 2017, 2018 CAP scores. You see in the top left, graph 1, this is your percent score in college and career ready by attendance rate for ELA. And it is highly, there's a high correlation here. And the higher your attendance, the higher you score, the likelihood of you scoring college and career ready on the state assessment goes up. And as you go down, so does the percentage of students that score college and career ready on the state assessment. We see this across all subject areas: math, science, and history, government, social studies. Although it's a correlation, I think that we can all postulate that if you're in school, if you have the opportunity to learn, you will end up doing better. We would like to dive in a little deeper on why students are absent, because we know that that can vary. And hopefully in the future, we'll be able to get more detailed data points on that. We broke it down by grade. You'll see that there is a drop in 6th grade, and then again, more significant drop in 11th and 12th grade. When I say total, where that drop is total above 95%. So your attendance rate is 95% or better. We see that in 6th grade it drops, and then again, 11th and 12th grade.
When you're talking about attendance rates, particularly I'm thinking for the middle school and high school students, are you counting excused and unexcused absences?
Yes.
Okay, so that could actually relate to the fact that our secondary students are just more active and missing more school to be
Absolutely.
at school-related activities or other, they're still marked absent, but excused.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
And so what we wanted to capture here is you're marked excused, you're marked absent, you're missing a class.
Doesn't
Something's
matter the
pulling you
reason.
out.
Yeah, okay.
So it may be worthwhile, and that's why I said again, it'd probably be important to dive down and really nitpick at why you're absent. But regardless, you're missing something, you're absent. Any other?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So when you look at the high school, and I guess the middle school as well, if somebody is missing one class, are we counting that as an absence?
So it depends on how the school is classifying it within Power School, where we pull the data from. And we need to be more consistent around those definitions. So as we get standardized around that, we should see that this data is more clear. At this point, I'm not sure the business rules for every individual school and how they classify that.
And so if we thought about it, though, just in terms of days, so in general, how many days would you miss if you were at 95%? Or, and I'm just trying to get some anchors to the percentages.
So first, we start with narrowing down the pool of students who qualify. You need 90 days or more of attendance in the district. That's where I set the cut of the first initial group. And then we calculate how many days you qualified for, how many days you attended, and then calculate the percentage off of that.
Right, but what I'm trying to do is get a sense for, is this 5 days? Is it 10 days? I mean, what are those, what would the numbers attached to that look like in general? Understanding that there are all kinds of differences here.
Right. And that's why I said that. Typically, 85% or below, you're looking at around 19 plus days.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, research shows that missing 10% or more negatively impacts. And so that's about 18 days, 17, 18 days. It's about 2 days a month. And so if you think about at 95%, I guess that will be about maybe 8, 9 days. And that's considered chronic absenteeism if you're missing 10% or more.
But that's totally seems reasonable if you're in
Choir and
a couple
football.
sports.
And I was
or
going to
activities, you are
clarify, at the secondary level, or actually at all of the levels, it's if you're gone one or more, at the secondary level is by hour. So you could be
there for half of the day and gone 4 hours, and each one of those, you're marked absence. So that's why their numbers are going to be larger. And at the elementary level, if you're gone, this year was 1 or more hour?
It was until we shifted it mid-year.
Okay, and then mid-year, we shifted it to,
On an hour was a half a day.
if you were gone an hour, it was equivalent to a half a day, so.
So I have I guess, a comment and a question. So again, during IBB, we've been talking about a lot of things, and this has actually been one of the things we've discussed is Power School and this collection of disciplinary data and absences and all sorts of stuff. And so when you kind of say creating a baseline, is it potential that like once this is all cleared up and this coming year, that data is entered with some sort of systematic way, that these numbers will look entirely different next year and that would actually be a baseline? Or do you really feel like this is are you working with the data as best you possibly can, knowing that the data is probably fairly faulty this year?
Yes, so I'm not going to know for sure kind of how good this data is until I can get a second year of data and I can do fidelity checks on that. And so we have a plan for this year for those fidelity checks to go into schools at regular scheduled times and check in on that data throughout the year. That would help me understand how close this data is to reality.
So I think you've addressed this, and I apologize for repeating yourself, but normally we look at this so we can tell what the comparison between 1 year and the next year. So if the data collected for 2017 and 2016 was collected exactly the same way, the comparison would be relevant in that the data is similar from across years. So when we look at this data, and some of it's pretty troubling, how do we know how that relates to the previous years? And as a board, when we say what are the practices and procedures related to discipline, for example, and the actions taken, particularly at the middle school level, where we see these large numbers of office referrals, it's reasonable for the board to say, what did this look like last year compared to this year? And additionally, what are we going to do differently? Which is the next question coming. But for you, this comparison between last year's data or 2016 data and now, why is that? What was the decision not to provide that?
I actually don't have access to that data.
Okay.
And so do
We do have the data, but Zach started last week and we were pulling this together. So we can do a follow-up on some of the data, but I think part of the challenge is that how it was collected this year compared to last year.
Yeah.
Because of Power School.
Yeah, and the trends that we saw last year are similar to the trends. So it's not apples to apples, it may be oranges to tangerines or
Okay.
that
Okay.
aligned.
Yeah.
So we have last year, this year, and then we'll have next year. And so as we continue, we will be able to actually make some like if we collect it next year and let's say it's pretty aligned, or we can tie things to, we may be able to make some correlations, not necessarily causations. I'm looking at Zach, but
won't be causations.
yeah. So we may be able
Words you don't
to
understand.
do that as we collect more of the data and look at trend data. We'll have a better idea around those things.
Okay, that's helpful.
That's something that we embedded in our strategic plan too, in strategic plan 2A about data informed, is making sure that we have consistent definition, consistent collection methods, analysis, and reporting and communication of data. And so that's something that I think Darcy and Rick has already began to work with our principals on, that consistent language and entering of data.
You answered my question, because that was something, especially when it comes to the discipline, like what qualifies as disrespect versus being a student advocating such.
Yes, and we'll be working on a data dictionary all this year to make sure that we have consistent language around what classifies and what doesn't. We'll do that on day 6, my day 6.
No pressure.
This is just a chart of the table that you saw before. Here is above 95% attendance rate. We broke it down by school, and they're chunked together, elementary, middle, and high. That table got a little cut off there, but the second column from the right is above 95%. And we made a table of that. Middle school and high school. We broke down attendance rate by race. Here's middle school attendance rate by race. And we see that the pattern really stays the same across the grade levels. And as they all decrease, the races decrease at about the same rate. So Asian remains the highest throughout the grades. Native American or American Indian and Alaska Native remains the lowest throughout the grade levels. Do you have any questions for me before we go to other team members to discuss how this ties into our strategic plan? Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You survived.
Yeah. We're really going to be nicer, but
Rougher next time.
you got a tough job.
Good evening. Leah Wisdom, Director of Equity, Instruction and Student Services. I wanted to talk for a little bit about things you've already heard about, but dig a little deeper into what are those things that we're doing in response to all the data that was just shared and the data that we're always looking at. So Dr. Lewis actually referred to Strategic Theme 2, Initiative 1, which has the implementation of CI3T and or multi-tiered system of support. So that action team, which I am heading, is working on and almost done with the action plan for what that's going to look like. And it really is about effective data usage. So CI3T and multi-tiered system support is huge, and all the things that we need to do to have effective implementation and sustainability is really large. And so as a team, we had to start to break that down and think about where are the places that make the most sense to support leadership teams in every building, and then their ability to turn around and support teachers. And what really kept coming back was effective use of data, which starts to bleed into Strategic Initiative 5, or Strategic Theme 5, and even one of their initiatives. And in working with Greenway Solutions, they talked to our team about putting that in scope for our initiative, even though it's a part of another theme. So we really wove that piece in, how for 1920 in year one, we're going to support teams in looking really deep at the data that they have, which has always been a part of the CI3T process for those teams. But in looking at all the feedback that we have and what built the strategic plan, we developed an action plan to support them specifically in that area. So I think that's a really important thing to be thinking about. That's going to bleed over into the professional learning that we're providing, and aligning it specifically with the action plan around that theme. Culturally relevant teaching is another professional learning opportunity that, and I'm going to say opportunity, thing that we're doing for all teachers in our district. So we're continuing on with that. And I think what's important there is while it's the same sort of set of 2 days of training for all of our staff, it's always modifying and adjusting based on what our data is telling us, so that staff is reflecting on what do we know right now about our students and how does that relate and connect to the culturally relevant strategies that we're learning about in these 2 days. AVID, which you've heard me talk about a lot, continues to be a system that we are utilizing to support specific students, but even more so thinking about access for all, and that's been a huge focus for the teams in buildings that are working on AVID implementation. we know that we have specific students in an Avid elective, but really working on pulling out those inquiry-based critical thinking strategies. And those teams, as you have seen the data that they get around Avid, and it's not just Avid students, it's school-wide data, they are regularly looking at current data to drive decision-making in their plan for implementation of Avid, and then they take that and put it into their school improvement plan. So it's integral in all of those pieces. We also have been doing some exploration of Avid Elementary, as you know. We had some principals attend the national conference. We have some also attending this summer with the bulk of our middle school and high school teams that are attending the Summer Institute and engaging in that. So we'll continue to explore that and see how it fits, or if it fits, and where it fits, but there certainly is a lot of crossover into the KISA process, redesign. So we have some of our principals that are doing redesign and PBL also thinking about what Avid Elementary might have to offer in the way of engagement strategies. And then finally, I wanted to take a minute to show you professional learning and how it's sort of organized for 1920. Anna's going to talk a little bit about something else while I pull it up.
So when Leah pulls up just how we're organizing the professional learning, part of what we're doing in response to some of the discipline data and the disparities between some of the middle schools and elementary is targeting our resources to support those schools that are having a higher number of office referrals. So 2 of our middle schools this year will be trained at different times in restorative circles. One on August 12th, so their PD day looks a little different because we wanted the entire staff, including our classified staff, to be there. And then the second middle school will be on the middle school PD day on November 1st. And then as we have hired administrators and an interventionist this year, at Liberty Memorial Central specifically, both of those new administrators have extensive training around restorative practices, and the interventionist as well. And we're also working with some local people who are trained in that to provide the support and coaching, because as we have engaged with experts in this area, one of the things that they have been clear on is you can't just do it and think it's going to work. It takes ongoing support and a commitment. So we are phasing it in based off what we're seeing in the data for individual schools. And then we'll bring the other 2 middle schools on board. Hopefully, the plan is for the next year. At the elementary level, at our schools that had some of the more frequent behaviors, one of them went through the responsive classroom training last year. A portion of their staff and the other portion went this summer, and then one of the other elementaries, we were able to send about 85% of their staff this summer to responsive classroom, because we did see quite a few improvements and benefits at the school that we started with last year. So what we're doing with our professional development this year is narrowing. There'll still be lots of options and choice for teachers. I don't want them to feel like we're just saying you have to do that. But there will be, depending on what level you are, where you are, you have to do a session in this area. So on the 12th, there are throughout the day for schools that are not necessarily going through the restorative practice training, restorative circle training, they will have an opportunity to attend a session around restorative circles and other interventions around how to engage and build relationships with students. And when Darcy comes up, we'll talk more about what we're doing with building leaders as leading around that. So I'll let Leah.
So just, Anna, I want to say before you step back, one of the things I really appreciate about the response that you have right now, and that I've mentioned to you privately, but I want to say publicly, I appreciate that in addition to providing the teachers at the elementary buildings, really and to you, Dr. Lewis, that you've targeted the buildings that need it the most, that we've made that decision that we're going to start restorative practices, and even though we can't do it at all 4 buildings, we're really going to target it at the schools where we need it. I also appreciate that one of the things I know, having practiced restorative justice or restorative practices with middle and high school aged kids, that without the wraparound services, so without someone that is assisting with something that looks a little bit like case management from in my field, that you have not forgotten that element. So in addition to the circles, I greatly appreciate that the district is looking at how do you utilize both the administrators, but also the behavioral interventionists to help fill that role. They won't be doing it exclusively. It probably won't be as extensively as if we had perhaps a social worker to provide services to students that didn't have an IEP within those buildings, but it still has that component, and I really appreciate that you recognize that and have done your research there. The other thing I wanted to just note is that, so we look at this data as a board at the end of every year, and given that we know there are buildings that we're piloting new programs, and we know that there have been referrals that are too high related to discipline. Is there a plan to collect the data more frequently? I know that you all are looking at it constantly, but to respond to that data more frequently, so that at the end of the year, when we look at it, there's not a building that says at the quarter, we've reached this number, because frankly, at the quarter when they meet that number, I would like you to tell me, we fixed it.
Yeah.
So like, I don't want to hear at the semester time, restorative practices didn't work and we didn't do anything else. I mean, I want to hear that you're plain not doing it anymore.
Yeah, and I don't want to steal Darcy's thunder, but there's a plan to look at this data more frequently and have some conversations with building leaders. In addition to that, as a part of the strategic planning, monitoring process, and reporting, different theme leaders will come to the board and kind of share with you where they are with some of these strategic plan initiatives and action steps, and they'll also have some data as well. In addition, I don't know if you're going to speak to performance matters.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let you.
We talk about Kevin Hurl, Executive Director of Student Services and Special Education. We hear lots of bad things about Power School. However, there are lots of good things about Power School. And Power School has a component called Performance Matters. And within it, we're setting up an early warning system so that as the system is set up so that anytime a student falls within a certain range that we define, it automatically notifies the administrators or the teachers that they hear something, and then our system is set up that we can start interventions right away and then track those.
That's such a big, I mean, I know that you all were doing that in the best that you could before, so I don't want people to hear that you were not addressing this before, because you certainly were. But this seems like such a stronger plan than what I have seen as a community member listening to these meetings. So I'm really excited about this direction, and I hope that it has the teeth I think it has.
So as you were mentioning, if a student reaches below a certain point, that it will notify administration, teachers. What would be the follow-up or the accountability for then those teachers and principals to make sure, or for example, the teacher to make sure that they followed up on that student? What would be that piece from that point?
I mean, I've been thinking about, we have a team, and I know Darcy's probably going to, again, don't want to steal your thunder.
Didn't address it, sorry.
But we do have a team that's working, I mean, Kevin and myself, Rick and Darcy, along with many of the Power School team members, building out Performance Matters and ensuring that what's in the early warning system and what's in Performance Matters is aligning with what's in CI3 team manuals. So the intent and purpose, and granted, I'm still learning, is that we'll have a really good way to pull that data in and get a sense of what's being utilized, what's actually, when it's being used, is it working? So there's a broad perspective that we can have as a district, and then I think as directors, there's a more finite way then to follow up.
And so we can see the information at a district level also. So our assessment teams and our data teams will be looking at information on a regular basis. So we'll get notified. We can look at that as a group, and then if there needs to be a discussion with administrators if something not be done, then that also happens.
Sorry, go ahead.
And like the instructional coaches, that would be, not just to say that teachers, I don't think teachers will willfully neglect it, but like that piece, from what I'm understanding, will then, maybe an instructional coach can come in and help guide
And I think those are discussions that'll happen at the building level. They should be looking at that data on a regular basis. They can see all the students. A teacher can see individual students as they come up, but also you can see the information as a group and as a school and a grade level.
So the piece about utilizing CI3T in the way that Dr. Lewis talked about in terms of prevention instead of being reactionary, this allows you to do that. So when people hear restorative practices, oftentimes they think that the large component of it is responding to someone, a kid that's gotten into trouble. But what this has created is an opportunity for you to prevent it before it occurs. So
The idea
really
behind
exciting.
CIT, it is a preventive model. It
Yeah.
is to find what a student needs before there's a problem.
Exactly.
before-
Yeah.
So.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
So just real quick, to give you a sense of kind of to loop us back to professional learning, this is the system that our staff are accessing to look at what's available to them on one of our upcoming professional learning days, which is August 12th. We're still adding to it, but what I wanted to point out to you is on this day, we have both classified and certified staff attending. All the sessions are organized by strategic theme. Certainly, the information-based learner-driven decisions have sessions of their own. We've also been bringing in all, so you can see here like who the individuals are who are facilitating sessions, which, by the way, we have a great number of teachers so that are actually going to be facilitating for their colleagues, which was something we heard in the feedback in the spring. But the presenters and the facilitators are coming together. We've had 2 sessions and we'll have some more where they're walking through, do they know and understand what the data is that is driving the need for their session, and then how it aligns with sort of our 3 main things, our strategic theme, our accreditation model, KISA, and then how it aligns with CI3T. And then we're creating slides, and they'll all have common slides at the beginning and at the end of every session, so staff will be seeing like, what was the intent of this session, and then what is the follow-up? I'm not just here to get it and to walk away, but what can I expect? Is there a place I can get additional support? Is this something that my learning coach can now follow up with me on? Or is this gonna be offered again when we come back together in October or January? And what would it look like to have a advanced session in this area? So this is just right now how how staff are accessing and how it's organized. We also have facilitators that are coming from out of district, so community members. That was actually something else our staff told us. They really wanted community members presenting to them as well, which the executive leadership team and the assessment team have kind of committed to. We will all be present in many of those sessions, but we will not be facilitating. We will be there to support and ensure those connections are made. But those people are coming. They've been really open to coming to our sessions and hearing making sure they understand how it connects, and then also including those slides. Dr. Buffalo has been working with our curriculum partners, like Handwriting Without Tears, for example. Those individuals are reaching out to me, and I'm giving them slides as well. So all of those things will be sort of there to help make those connections for staff. August 9th, do you want me to go here, or do you want to talk about it?
Oh, you can.
August 9th, which is the Friday before, is curriculum all day. And we're just now getting it in here, but you can kind of see this is not organized by strategic theme, it is organized by content area, the color codes. But that entire day, staff will be working in various capacities on curriculum. And we can go back to that slide, and then if we need to talk about the PD, we can. Oh, sorry, it's Darcy.
But it's okay, and as Darcy comes, I hope the board sees the intentionality around the work that we're doing and beginning to see how the arrows are beginning to align, definitely with the strategic plan themes. And one other thing I want to point out, and Anna mentioned some of the work that we're going to do with restorative practices and restorative circles, is that KSB released an article and talked about restorative practices across the state. But then they also followed one of the challenges associated with restorative practices is training. It's like $4,000 per person. We're not going to wait until we get that money. Of course, you just saw the budget. It's not there. But we're beginning to partner with people like John Arante at KU, right? And there's other resources that we're bringing in. Whereas Laura Lori Folsom talked to me about a book, Circle Forward. We're in the process of potentially hopefully ordering that book. So we're beginning to do some things that we can control when it comes to restorative practice that will ultimately impact those discipline numbers.
I had a question about that. How are we involving the RAP workers at those buildings that are doing that more intensive building-wide training?
So that's why we're doing it on the 12th, because all of our classified staff, our RAP, everybody who's an employee or works in that building on a regular basis is expected to attend, and the principals are communicating. So that's why we did not do it in the summer, because then you're dealing with schedules, but that is a day that they will attend, but they should be there.
And the RAP program, we work closely with Bert and Ash, and they've actually changed their schedule, and we include them in all of our trainings. So with our social workers and our psychologists, they'll be part of those trainings. So we treat them kind of like our staff, and so the expectations they will be.
Great, thank you.
My turn? I was back there, you probably saw me, I was standing up and sitting down, standing up, sitting down, because I'm so excited about, it's like a barn raising. I was talking to Denise Johnson, I think, today, and when I came in, I said, we've got Jenny's great work with curriculum, and we've got the CI3T, and we've got the leadership coming, and we have data. And it's like everything's coming up to create something really great. And so all of your questions about the attendance and clarity and all of that good stuff, we're talking about all of that. And it's exciting to me because this is my passion, right? So when Anna asked if I could share with you some of the things that we're doing with our leadership to develop them even further, I jumped at the chance. With Dr. Lewis coming on board, we've had an increased focus on data. And quite frankly, we have been given data this year that we've never had before. And the amount of information that our administrators have and the manner in which it has been presented, they have embraced it. Now that we know, it's kind of that when we know better, we do better kind of adage, and that is the journey that we're setting out on. It has launched a lot of conversations because we now have a common vernacular. We can talk. It's probably oranges and tangerines, but we're talking. And those types of conversations had not occurred in the past because we were gathering it in a myriad of different ways. So what I've done, and I have Rick on speed dial if you have any secondary questions, but I will try to appropriate our vision as best I can here. We've listed out about 7 different points. I'm going to briefly go through those, but if at any time you want to stop me, it'll probably be I'm talking too long instead of too short. So, clarity, communication, and consistent implementation. If we learned one thing with all this data, and poor Zach didn't have his bag set down yet before I had him in my office talking about all this, and he's been great. He jumped right into the deep end. And that is, we don't have common definitions around what we are doing in regards to our attendance policies, our discipline behavior. So we need to clarify those definitions. Secondly, we need to communicate and we need to train around it. And we're in the process of doing that right now with our meetings that we're having in those banded meetings. And staying within the defined parameters that we've set out within the definitions. And lastly, we need to implement it with fidelity so that we're giving you and our community and ourselves an accurate reflection of what's actually going on in the buildings instead of those adaptive and technical missteps that we know occurred this year, and we're owning that. Professional learning communities. Last year, we modeled that at the administrative level, and starting fall 2019, all buildings, all levels are reigniting professional learning communities. And that is nothing new. We've heard that a lot, PLCs. But what that does is provide basically a structure by which we can have those meetings that are data informed, I guess, and student driven. Instead of it just erroneously happening, or it happens at a staff meeting here, or a professional development there, but we have a designated time. Our administrators are committed to that. Rick and I are holding them accountable to being present in those meetings on a scheduled basis themselves. So that will be tightening up. And all of that, we will use the data that Zach provides for us as the foundation by which we hold all those conversations. I talked a little bit about the level band meetings, but quite frankly, this is where those nitty-gritty conversations have been happening, where we've been talking about the adaptive and technical disparagements between the different campuses. So for example, a product that came out of that is we have in our CI3T manuals, we have a behavior matrix that has level 1, 2, and 3 infractions, right? Well, if I was at Sunset Hill and somebody or a child did something, I could code it one way. If you're at Prairie Park, Kelly, you might code it something different based on your interpretation. And we hadn't had those conversations in that finite manner or discrete manner. So we're having those now. In addition, next to all those infractions, we are putting the corresponding code. So there's no guesswork in it. So if a child does X on level 2, it's going to be coded with this. And everybody has that common anchor document. So that's one example, and I could go on, but that's one example of the type of concrete products that are coming from those level band meetings. Personal growth goals, every administrator this past year and moving forward into next year will be designing their own personal growth goals, which will show us, and it's going to be a working goal, not one that we put at the top of our document at the beginning of the year and look at it at the end of the year, but one that Rick and I will talk with, I guess, the administrator and monitor on our monthly one-on-one meetings that we have. That is a static agenda item on every meeting that we have with them, and both he and I meet with the administrators at least once a month. Our new folks, absolutely more frequently than that. But those goals will be directly tied to those deficit areas within the school that is respective of the campus that the administrator is leading. Kind of talked a little bit about those one-on-one monthly meetings. There's a myriad of topics and they're never long enough. But the goals, their school improvement plan, and data, which kind of ties into that next bullet point, we talk about data all the time. And Dr. Lewis's message, if I can appropriate it correctly, with the academic team is, how can we support you in this journey? So we're going out, we're doing the walkthroughs. Dr. Lewis has talked about that. The principals themselves do the walkthroughs. One of the things, I just did a survey, and one of the feedback items is they love doing the walkthroughs, but they want to take and harness some of that time to look at their data. Now that they have data that they really have faith in, they want to take some of that time and maybe not do a walkthrough every month, but take time and look at attendance data. Look at how our new policy is impacting the data and kind of do those gut checks on where are we at. The evaluation tool. So it was probably about a year ago that Rick and I cornered Dr. Lewis in a big white van on the way to a conference, and I believe it was our first professional conversation we had, and Rick and I shared our concern with the evaluation tool that our administrators were currently being evaluated by, because we didn't feel that it captured the complexity of their roles. And it didn't allow for us to show a discrepant difference between our principals who were knocking it out of the park and those who needed a little bit more support in other areas because it was too generic. So with his blessing, he said, okay, go research with an implementation target of fall 2019, right? Because we can't do it to him this year. So Rick and I took it, and we did that, and what we found was the Professional Standards for Educational Leaders, acronym PEASL, And what it was, upon digging a little bit further, is it's actually the latest iteration of our ISLIC standards. And we are currently using 2008 ISLIC standards. That's what the state has loaded into the KEEP repository. So quite frankly, when we did our research on it, when we came across those, it was kind of a drop the mic moment because it truly captures the complexity of their role. And analogous to Danielson, it has the attributes under each standard, and there are 10 of them, which clearly define actionable items that we can work with the administrators on, just like we work with our teachers, right? So we brought that back to the executive leadership team. They approved it, and then Rick and I took it to the state and talked to them about changing out, our tools. And they became kind of enamored with what we had found, and subsequently began an advisory committee. And then they're looking at changing it statewide. So PSEL, if you look nationwide, is definitely the gold standard by which we're measuring our administrators. And so Rick and I are really excited to embrace that at the Administrative Institute in June. We rolled it out, and I think that the principals felt that it truly did capture the complexity and nuances of their role. So those are just some of the things that we're doing, but I'm happy to answer any questions about the other items that you had as well.
I have a question. That's a shock, I'm sure. Actually, not a question. It's sort of a question. The evaluation tool, in conversation with Dr. Lewis, he shared that there's an equity component to that tool. Is that correct? I mean, thinking about the data we saw, that principals will now be evaluated in some extent in relation to how their building is doing with equity work.
Yes, and when I talked about the complexity, I should have mentioned not only that, you're going to like this one, it has a large social emotional component. It does not have a standalone standard for that, but even better, it is braided within all of the standards. And again, they are PSEL recognize the evolution of leadership and how equity and social emotional, that holistic child, is truly where we're going. As a matter of fact, and I might get the exact verbiage wrong, but at the end of each standard, it says for the academic success and well-being of each student or something of that manner. But every standard ends with that.
Okay, so that's consistent with the direction we're going in terms of weaving equity into all of our work.
Absolutely,
correct?
and not have it at standalone, but more embedded.
Excellent. Okay. And then one other quick question I have, and in did I cut somebody off? No. Oh. No. In negotiations, there's been conversations about making time for PLCs, particularly at the secondary level. So when we think about committing that time, what is the problem solving that's been going on around how we ensure that that's happening at that level?
Particularly at the high school is where we have the challenge. And as we've talked about it, one of the things as we're looking at implementing late start, some of the redesign, some of that will impact schedule in the 2020 school year. You can plan for that. But going forward, this year, they do have PLC time every other week. One of the things that actually Samry and I have discussed is each week the principals can have a 30-minute staff meeting. They have not necessarily been utilizing that time on a weekly basis. So on the off week of their PLC weeks, one of the things that we are going to talk to the high school principals about is leveraging that time as well, because then you would have a touch base. So during that time, for example, whatever they're working on in their dedicated PLC time the next week, they can do some front loading. But that's one way that is cost neutral, because there's already that, it's just leveraging the time that they already have built in until we can work out a schedule where it's embedded at the high schools. Elementary and middle school have collaboration time, so it looks a little different. But that's one piece of time that we can probably capture and utilize different for this upcoming school year until we have time to flesh out what some different schedules can look like to incorporate both seminar advisory type time and some committed PLC time.
Okay. This is my last thing. The Native American Student Services, which will now fall underneath your purview, Leah. My understanding from our presentation that we saw last week was that there is really an emphasis that's led by the committee and by Jennifer to think about relationship building as a component of the work they're doing, and to create a space where they can have, where students can have a strong, their identity is represented within the school community, but within their within Native American Student Services specifically. But what I'm wondering about, having looked at the data this evening, in which we see some pretty significant areas related to attendance and to student outcomes, and you correlated those two things, how we think about building relationships within the building level so that students want to be there. So we last week we saw, our last couple meetings ago, we saw this kind of inner identity community building that's happening there, but it's one of the only marginalized groups that has this specific funding targeting their needs specifically. And in your assessment, I know Jennifer's not here to really talk about it, but is there a way that we can leverage that funding in a different way now that we are getting better data? And you don't have to answer that exactly right now, but it is something that occurs to me, having been to a couple of their meetings and sort of listened to what they would like to see that money utilized for, and kind of in the same way that we have looked at the responsive classrooms in segments. So we did Kennedy staff half one year and then half this year. Are there things like that that we could be doing specifically to address the needs of Native students, and leveraging that particular resource that the district has and not every district does?
Which is very effective.
We have had a discussion about how we can look at, instead of just looking at those two groups of students that you serve, how we can look at Native students across the district. Because it's kind of, some of the data we look at when we look at NAS, it's not really representative of everyone. So when she says it's 100% graduation rate one year, well, that was just for those students. But how do we make sure that we're impacting all Native students, or having some type of impact, or offering access? We don't have an answer yet, but we are looking into how we can do some of that.
Yeah. Appreciate that. Thank you.
And so Kevin, before we leave this slide, is going to talk a little bit about one of the things that we're going to do with our principals and the principal PLCs, as far as really looking at alternatives to suspension and discipline to impact that data.
And when working with Darcy and Rick and looking at our administrative professional learning communities, part of it is making sure we're communicating a consistent expectation and belief about suspension and discipline. And so we're going to start working with our building principals, looking at an alternative discipline framework. And part of that is making sure that when we look at that framework, it has the restorative part, the reflective part, and the instructional part. And often we forget the instructional part of discipline for students. And it's kind of akin to when a student can't read, we don't send them home for 3 days and hope when they get back that they can read all of a sudden. And it's the same thing about discipline. And so working with our administrators to create that framework in the buildings, and understanding that it's three-tiered also, just like when we talk about CI3T, there is that preventive, that what do we do for all students so that we don't get to that third tier. But we are going to work with our principals, building leaders, and creating that. And it is a belief system, so it's not a one-time this happens. It is a discussion that principals have to understand that belief, and as a district we have to believe that, working with our teachers and making sure that's what direction we're going to go as a building. But we're going to work with all buildings administrators with that.
And being intentional about, we pull our principals once a month for administrative professional development, and embedding that throughout the year with action steps and follow-up that Rick and Darcy can wrap around in their one-to-one and band meetings about whatever we're discussing or saying, here's something to try or implement, they can follow through on that.
And then the evaluation tool, administrators, it is easy to put these things into it. If those expectations are clear and we have an understanding, how do we monitor that and support buildings?
So the last component from the data that you saw regarding curriculum, a lot of this, Dr. Besselo couldn't be here tonight, so I'm talking very high level about some of the things that she shared, but specifically, some of the things that we are going to do, she talked about like the fidelity of implementing the ELA and then moving into math and the culturally sustainable resources. We are moving forward with the adoption of RE 180, specifically at 6th grade. It's a Tier 2 intervention, and we'll train all of our 6th grade teachers for those students who are not proficient in reading and identifying them at each one of them. They'll receive that additional support during their guided studies time, so they wouldn't be pulled from an elective or they won't miss regular instruction time because they all have guided studies built into their schedule. She talked about K2, A to Z, RAS. It's being extended to K5. And really working, as Zach talked about, MAP not really giving us the information that we need to address what's occurring with our students, really starting to work on and focus on common formative assessments so that we can make the adjustments as the year's going on and not looking at so much diagnostic data at the end of the year. So those were some of the high-level points that she put together. But if you think about her report a couple of meetings ago, I was just reiterating what she said for this one. So that is everything. Do you guys have any additional questions about the data?
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, team.
Anything else? Okay. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I get to hit the clock.
Yes.
First time.
Good job, Melissa.
Thank you.
Papers too.
And
You or Julie take a picture.